Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Monday, December 30th around here, and we are on the eve of the CFP quarterfinals. So we're going to break down that first game. We're going to break down Penn State, Boise State today. We'll probably do the next three tomorrow, so definitely be on the lookout for that. But wanted to make sure I got that one out of the way, gave you guys plenty of time to look over that one before that game eventually happens. Then we'll get to a couple of bowl game reactions from this past weekend. We had 6 games that really stood out to me, and then we'll go into segment 3 and we'll just kind of finish up the rest of them. We'll talk about all the games that have already happened, and then we got a number of ones coming up this week. Want to make sure I get those on y'all's radar before we fully dive into the CFP quarterfinals. We have some transfer portal news. It is officially closed, at least the calendar has closed. We'll talk about some of the details of when it's actually going to close here pretty soon, but definitely a lot of big names that have come off the market. A&M doing some great work at the wide receiver position. And then we'll get to some quarterfinal questions. We'll get to some just basic questions about, is rest versus rust. That's the big thing that's going into this weekend that we don't really know the answer to yet. We'll try to figure it out on today's show. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show. And the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have fun back and forth here, is to use that super chat. At the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page, you can click that $sign, add any question, comment you like. It'll pop up on the screen with your name, and we can have a fun back and forth here. Definitely want this to be as interactive as possible, so definitely utilize that, especially if you have any questions about this one. Huge game out there in Phoenix this tomorrow actually. Penn State, Boise State, going to be a really incredible matchup. We are officially at the CFP quarterfinals. It is going to be a really, really interesting time. A lot of people hoping for some better games this time around, and I tend to believe we're going to get some really good ones. Will this be one of them? I think is a little bit more up in the air, but let's jump into this thing. Penn State is favored by 11.5 in this game, 53.5 the over-under, pretty much middle of the road, maybe a couple more points in this one than some people expect, but overall, I think before we get into details, just broad strokes purposes, they need number 2. Boise State absolutely needs number 2 to be the biggest player in this game. They need Ashton Jeanty to take over this game because the reality of this matter is they can lose this game if Ashton Jeanty goes for 170 yards and 2 scores. They can't win it if he goes for 30 yards and no scores. That's just the reality of this offense. That's the reality of the gap between these two teams. He is the guy that can bridge that gap. So if you're losing the line of scrimmage battle on the defensive side of the ball, if you're giving up a couple of explosives on that side of the ball, if you're struggling offensively at different times, he's going to be able to be that kind of trump card that you can throw down and say, maybe we'll just get a 60-yard run here, and he's very capable of doing it. He did it against Oregon earlier in the year, definitely different circumstances, and it'll be interesting to see how much carries over from this game, from that game all the way back in week 2 to this game this time around, because teams have changed. Let's just be totally honest. Penn State is a much better team than probably Oregon was in week 2, and Oregon is definitely a much better team than they were in week 2. So overall, I think it's kind of a tightrope walk. You have to figure out, how much is Ashton Jeanty going to play a huge piece in this game, and how much can he take on his shoulders? How much can he actually bear in this game? Because the reality is, he is the guy that kind of gives them a shot here. There are a number of really good players on that Boise State team, and there's a number of guys that can have impacts on this game and need to have impacts on this game in a number of different respects. None of it matters if Ashton Jeanty does not have a big game. Let's just be totally honest. They could do just about everything right. If they don't have number 2 playing at a very high level, it's going to take a really, really Herculean effort from someone else to possibly pull this off. So that's the first thing. Just broad strokes purposes, they need this guy to be what he's been all year and maybe a little bit more than that. But on top of that, you need a counterpunch. There's no world where you're going to be able to just run him 35 times in a row. He's going to go for 275 yards, 3 scores, and you're going to walk out with a 21-20 win. You badly need something else. You badly need a counterpunch, and it's not going to be the easiest defense to give a counterpunch against because their back end is pretty darn good. Now, I do think there are openings to be had, but not much openings to be had if they're able to stop Jeanty early. They're not going to be worried about that pass game very much. But Cameron Camper, Latrell Caples, Matt Lauder, all those guys are hugely important for this game. Not just, they don't need to make all the plays in the world. I don't need Cameron Camper to go out there for 12 catches, 150 yards, and 2 scores. That is not what he's going to do in this game. What he does need to do is maybe catch that 3rd and 8 when they get back behind the chains and Ashton Jeanty starts to struggle. Or when when they need a jump ball in the end zone, Matt Lauder needs to go up and make that play. Latrell Caples on an end around needs to be able to take a little bit of pressure off Ashton Jeanty in the run game. So it's really all about, it's number 2 at the very center, and then the peripheral the players on the outside, the players on the defensive and offensive side of the ball just need to fill in the gaps. And defensively, the gaps are very, very simple. It's very simple how they're going to be able to explode this game is the pass rush. They're second in the country in sacks this year with 51 on the year. If they can get after Drew Aller, there are still mistakes to be had. He's still a young quarterback. He is still new to all of these trappings and all of these craziness around these big-time games. You get to him early, you force a mistake early, some things could happen pretty quickly. So those are the two things. You have Ashton Jeanty. You have one of the best players in the country, maybe the best player in the country, depending on who you're talking to. He is going to have to carry the load, whether that's 150 yards rushing, 200 yards rushing, whatever that looks like. He's going to have a big game, because if he doesn't have a big game, they're not winning this game. Just plain and simple, and it probably will look a little bit ugly on the way there. But on the flip side of that, if they can get Ashton Jeanty running the ball, if they can control the clock the way that they have been against a number of other teams and get a couple of those explosive runs that he's so good at breaking, and then that defensive line can show up the way they have pretty much this entire year and really kind of explode this thing, that's the path to an upset. That's the path to possibly getting 1 turnover, getting 2 turnovers from Drew Aller, getting a short field, getting Ashton Jeanty into the end zone, and then you look up and you're up 7 points with about 4 minutes left, and Penn State is the one that's kind of struggling at the end. So that's kind of your path forward. Now, how realistic is it that you're going to find the openings that you need to is a bigger question for this one, because that Penn State defense is terrifying. Let's just be totally honest. They're number 7th in the country when it comes to rush yards per game, and Ashton Jeanty obviously changes some things. There are a lot of very good run defenses that weren't so good when they played number 2, but at the end of the day, this is going to be one of the stiffest challenges he has faced all year, definitely since Oregon, and it's going to be really interesting to watch how they're going to be able to figure that out. Now, the counterpunch category, having to find a couple of those openings on the back end and having to get Cameron Camper the ball and find a couple of big plays down the field. Penn State, I believe their back end can be attacked. I do believe that there are openings on that back end to go after. Oregon showed that. A couple of different teams have showed that throughout the year. The issue with that is, if you can't get the run going, none of that's going to matter. They are plenty good enough on the back end to handle you if they don't have to, commit more guys to the box. If they don't have to make sure they have 8, 9 guys in the box just to stop number 2. There are going to be openings on the back end. If they don't have to do that, if they feel confident sitting 6-5 guys in the box and just handling the run that way, it's going to be pretty tough. So it all comes with being able to set up Ashton Jeanty, and then there should be some openings on this back end, although it's a very, very strong group up there. And then you look at the pass rush element of this, getting after Drew Aller. How does that kind of affect the game plan, and can they do it? The Penn State O-line has given up 8 sacks all year. They've been very, very good in that category pretty much all year. Boise State has 4 guys that can really, really make a lot of problems for them, and definitely is a guy that can they're definitely a group that can make a lot of noise in this game. The issue is you're going up against a very good group, and you're going up against an offense that, in a lot of cases, Drew Aller is going to get the ball out of his hands pretty quickly. He's going to facilitate the ball to the playmakers and then let things kind of fall into place. So overall, it's a thin path. Let's just be totally honest. I don't think anyone is thinking any differently about this game. It is a thin path for Boise State to find their way to a victory here. That being said, you do have the best player on the field. Ashton Jeanty will be the best player on the field tomorrow. And then defensively, you probably have the better, I don't want to say that. You probably have a very good pass rush that absolutely can get after Drew Aller well enough to at least force a couple of mistakes. And that's what Boise State needs. They need Ashton Jeanty to run the ball the way he pretty much has all year, get over 150, possibly get in the end zone a couple of times, and then their defense just has to make a couple of plays, whether that's a sack on 3rd down or a pick or a forced pick or a forced fumble on Drew Aller, whatever that looks like. They have to make a couple of those plays because without those 50-50 plays, without Ashton Jeanty having an incredible game, and without them at least keeping their cool just a little bit throughout these really tough moments throughout this game, this one could get ugly, and it could get ugly in a hurry. So it's a thin path. There's no doubt about that, but you have the openings to do it, and it's because of this guy. And that's the first player to watch. Let's be honest. I could get crazy here. I could, call out a wide receiver that needs to have a big game and everything in between. This is the guy. You need him to have the game that he's been having pretty much all year. You need to make sure that he is the absolute center of your offense. Now, Penn State knows that as well. There's no two ways about that. But the reality is, so many teams try to mess up or mix up what they're trying to do in these types of games because they know they're outmatched on the other side. Just play your game. Play with your guy, trust your guy, and let him go to work in this one, and you'll probably like the results, if I'm being totally honest. And then you got Jaden Virgin-Morgan on the outside for Boise State. We talked about that pass rush, 51 sacks on the year. This is their leading sack guy, and he's got to get after him. There are some really solid offensive tackles for Penn State, one relatively young one in Anthony Donko, and I think there is some openings to possibly get after him if you can early. I think when you get after this Penn State offense early and when you kind of put them behind the chains early, I think there starts to be a little bit of a panic. We've seen it at different points throughout this year where it's taken them a little bit of time to kind of regroup after a mistake or regroup after just kind of missing the mark just a little bit. If Jaden Virgin-Morgan and Ahmad Hassanin can really get after this quarterback, some really incredible things should happen early in this game that gives Boise State a 14-0 advantage before we even know what hit us. And then Harrison Wallace, very important player for Penn State's future. If they want to win a national title, number 6 is going to be massive, and all those wide receivers are really going to be massive, but this is the guy that I think we all trust the most. You have Tyler Warren. He takes a lot of pressure off you, but the reality is, if you can't push the ball downfield, at some point someone's going to be able to pin you in. Maybe it's not in this game. Maybe it's Boise State isn't quite capable of stopping the run the way some other teams will. But the reality is at some point you're going to need those big plays over the middle of the field. He's going to have to be the guy to go make them. One way or the other, he's going to be a huge player in this Penn State journey. And then Zane Durant. When you're playing a guy like Ashton Jeanty, if you have a guy at nose tackle or at defensive tackle like Zane Durant, he's the most important player. He's going to have to plug the middle. That Boise State offensive line is going to have their hands full. They did really well against Oregon early on in the year. I think it's probably going to be a little bit tougher of a test. This is a very, very good, very deep group, and Zane Durant's definitely going to lead the way. If they can slow him down at the line of scrimmage, obviously Ashton Jeanty can make plays after contact, but I don't think it's a great, it's not a recipe for success for Boise State, let's just put it that way. But some keys to the game for Boise State, just unleash the pass rush. I understand that some bad things could happen on the back end. You could have openings on the back end, and you probably will if you don't get home right away. You're not winning this game without sacks. You're not winning this game without getting to Drew Aller, without moving him off his spot, without making him nervous. So the reality is, you're going to have to make some decisions. You're going to have to rush 6 and then leave 5 on the back end to cover 5 guys and hope that they can cover all of them. You're going to have to rush 7 at different times and be outmatched on the other side and just hope you can get home. It's going to be a lot of roulette. It's going to be a lot of just kind of rolling the dice, hoping that you come up right. But the reality is, when you have 51 sacks on the year, you come up right a lot. So we'll see what happens in that one. That's definitely something that I understand the back end's going to need some help at times with Tyler Warren and all these receivers. If you don't get to Drew Aller, you don't win this game, plain and simple. And then trust your guy. There's a million different examples I can go through of teams that are playing higher rated, more talented, more physically imposing teams, and they say, oh, we got to catch them off guard. We got to do something different. We got to zig while they think we're going to zag. Just trust number 2. He's one of the best players in the country. He's the best running back in the country. He is the most dangerous player on the field whenever he steps on it. Hand him the ball and get out of the way. Well, offensive linemen stay in the way, but everyone else, the reality is this is the game plan. Number 2 has gotten you here. Let him take you to a win. He is really the only chance you have to take you to a win here. And then make Penn State sustain drive. This is going to be a huge thing. If Penn State starts hitting explosive early in this game, which Drew Aller is plenty capable of doing, you're going to have a big-time problem. There's no doubt about that. You're going to have to be able to slow down those explosive plays and then really just make them inch down the field. They're capable of doing it. I'm not saying that Penn State can't win the game that way, but it will limit possessions. It will limit the margin that Penn State is able to get, and then it will give you a shot when the fourth quarter rolls around, and that's really all you can ask for if you're Boise State. And then for Penn State, just attack mode early, get after these guys, because the reality is Boise State knows everything that I just said. They understand that they are physically outmatched in this one. They understand that if they're going to have a big-time game, it's going to be Ashton Jeanty leading the way. They get all of that. So the reality is attack. Go after them from the jump, and then at the end of the day, they might look up and say, down 21-0 halfway through the first quarter, and we don't know what we're doing now. Because if they do get down 14-0, 21-0 early on in this game, then it's not on Ashton Jeanty's shoulders. Then it's on Maddox Madsen's shoulders, and you'd much rather it be there. And that's actually the next key. make him beat you. If you're going to lose this game, it is not going to be because Ashton Jeanty ran for 250 yards and 3 scores. That cannot be the reason. So make sure you stack the box. If it has to be 8, 9 guys, whatever you have to do to slow down number 2, you do that. And then you live with what happens on the back end. You have Jalen Kimber, you have A.J. Harris. They should be able to hold up against these wide receivers for Boise State, force them into passing downs, and you'll probably love the way that this game ends. And then play mistake-free. When you play one of these games where the line is so big, the physical ability is so big between the two teams, if Penn State plays mistake-free football, if they don't turn the football over, if they don't have bad penalties, if they don't have to settle for 3 points when they could have gotten 7, they're going to be more than fine. They're going to win this game. You have to make Boise State earn absolutely everything they get in this game, and if you give them a couple of short fields, that's when this game can get really interesting. So, two teams that have had really, really incredible years. Boise State has been one of the stories of the year, particularly Ashton Jeanty, and I think he's going to be able to maybe get close to that record. I believe it's 133 is what he needs to pass Barry Sanders for that all-time rushing record, but at the end of the day, Penn State's just got too much for this one. I think that Penn State offense is going to be able to make a number of plays down the middle of the field. I think that pass rush for Boise State might take a little bit longer to get home than they're going to need to, and I think Drew Aller in a dome is going to be able to make a number of big-time plays in this one. I do like Ashton Jeanty to get probably over 100 yards, get a couple of scores in there, but at the end of the day, I think Penn State probably runs away with this one, starts the CFP quarterfinals on not necessarily the note that we want, but I think we got 3 great ones on the next day, and we will break those down tomorrow, but definitely going to be an incredible game out there in Phoenix. I'm going to pick Penn State to win it relatively comfortably, and move forward to play the winner of that Notre Dame-Georgia game for a spot in the national title. Absolutely crazy to talk about that with James Franklin, but here we are. He's 1 win away from possibly making his way to the national title. But let's take our first break here. Went a little bit long on that one, but let's take our first break here, and when we come back, we got bowl game reactions. We got a couple of huge ones that I want to talk about, and then in the third segment, we'll go a little bit more into depth with a couple of them, but we'll break it down right after this, so stick with us.